This is willpower.
This is so exciting. Zack Kramer.
Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be in person.
Willpower podcast. Who would have known?
I know.
So much to talk about. We just had a massive day.
Yes,
it's
been a full day.
Full day. And when we're still ready to talk about stuff because we have such alignment with like the breathing piece and the sports performance piece. And I will have given you this beautiful, juicy intro right before this in post-production, so don't worry. We're here at the Not Dead Yet Studios in St. Louis, right fresh out of day one of Sherpa Breath and Cold instructor training.
It's awesome.
So baller. And it was so nice of you to be there and share with the
you.
group everything there is to know.
Me.
Yeah, so good. I want to just like lean in a little bit to your story. So, of course, I will have introed you at performance breathing and working with the BreatherFit and PN Medical and just your background, which I think is really important, weave into the story of what we're going to talk about today, which is a lot around understanding respiratory muscle training, which if you're listening in and that sounds boring, that's fine. But there's so much juice in this lemon. So get ready to talk about how you can improve yourself with the lowest hanging fruit that nobody is utilizing in the sports performance space. It's insane.
Yeah. And you're one of the few in the breathing space, I feel like, that's really jumped on board with it.
I'm like all in.
Yeah.
If you couldn't tell today. And I wasn't just saying those testimonials of how I've used the device and loved it and seen such improvement with it. I wasn't making that up, right? I was like, this has been a big part of my life for 5 or 6 years now. So very exciting. Okay, good. So let's just backtrack just a little so that everybody understands and knows where you come from a background standpoint and why you're so passionate about breathing and sports performance collectively.
To frame that, I'll say like it was really cool hearing you talk about that today in the course, just talking about, like what you bring to the table is who you can work with the best, like kind of like where you're coming from. Those are the people you can then kind of bring that history to. And I definitely think that's kind of, what brought me to where I am.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I guess we go all the way back. I played all the sports growing up. Played football, and then was lucky enough to play college football, Division III football, but still like played through all 4 years, and like a major experience that shaped me a lot. Looking back, I joke that I enjoyed training for football more than I enjoyed playing football. Like,
it's wild.
I was one who loved just being in the gym during the off season, like doing all the weights. And so from there, I don't even know if we've talked about this, but from after college, I went to seminary. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I didn't know that.
I went to seminary for 3 years, and I still love training. And so I was the super weird guy in the seminary classes. I was taking pre-workout, like timing. We've got 20 minutes left in class. I'm going to take my pre-workout, and then I can hit the gym after like New Testament studies or whatever.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I was training and stuff, and I got into CrossFit while I was in Atlanta doing seminary, and just went head over heels into CrossFit. I needed something to compete in, and I found it. And I was all in on CrossFit. Long story short, graduated from seminary and became a full-time CrossFit coach. Eventually moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, opened up my own CrossFit gym, which I ran for 6 years, and worked with a lot of athletes in the gym as well. Like got my CSCS, which is like the strength and conditioning merit badge. It's like
basically it's like the sommelier of CrossFit. Strength and conditioning.
Yeah, strength and conditioning.
Conditioning.
Yeah. So it's like that's the sticker, the gold sticker you have to have to work in that space. And then anyways, so running the gym, and I was still training a lot, trying to compete, and I found Wim Hof breathing, started doing that, and it just led me down this whole rabbit hole of what is going on, which led me to some more of the oxygen advantage performance type breathing things, and started nasal breathing during exercise. And after I made that adaptation, it was just like an eye-opening, game-changing experience for my fitness. Like having all these new tools with just my breathing. And I was just kind of like, what am I doing as a coach, as a strength coach? Like I'm trying to help people squat and tell them to keep their knees out, but no one knows how to breathe or brace, or they have all these mobility issues that are preventing them from performing well and being able to breathe well. And I just started to like see all these foundational issues nobody told me I should try to work on for my athletes. So I just went all in on training athletes on that. And basically as I started doing that, I just started falling more and more in love with just coaching breathing, and ended up selling the gym, went all in on coaching athletes.
Yeah, which is like, so it's such an important piece of the puzzle right now is putting breath work together with athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I want to like reflect upon is that you talked about, hey, I found Wim Hof, right? We hear a lot of people talk about that, especially in like when we're talking in Sherpa Breath and Cold about all the cold exposure. It's like many times it's the gateway drug, right? Wim is the gateway drug to more breath, more cold. And there's just something about the Wim Hof style and method. And then there's something about oxygen advantage, right? All of these fundamental pieces that we keep sort of layering into the recipe for how we can apply the tools. And even this is why Sherpa Breath and Cold exists. It's a framework, right? It's not a method. It's like, how do we take all of the ingredients that are possible in the kitchen and build it into the context of the person that we're working with you and some of the work that I'm doing with Sherpa is also it's like this sports performance athleticism, working with collegiate athletes, working with people at different levels, whether they're training for their own personal, like a triathlon where they want a PR, or it's someone that's playing professional sports. When we're talking about this stacking in the breath work, can you just talk a little bit more about how long the road is, how many things you've found over time that are like pieces of the breathing puzzle, because it's not being talked about in professional sport at university level.
Right.
Having this conversation last night with Josh Hildebrand, who runs in St. Louis Breath and Exposure here, really talking about every time we approach a coach or every time we find somebody, Division 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. There's sort of like a resistance that still exists in a lot of the sports space, whether it's men's 100%. Teams, women's teams, solo athlete, or team sports. And just like the road is long from a breath perspective, but also are you finding that as well? Like in the world as you go out to be like, hey, I got some ideas about breath, and people are like, that's cute. Call me next week.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess 2 parts to that question. Like one was about me like learning more and more breathing stuff.
Yeah.
Like the quote that comes to mind is the more you know you don't know shit type of thing is like, I feel like I've tried to learn as much as is possible with the amount of time I have in my week. And still I'm like, I don't know anything. Like there's just so much more I know that's out there about breathing that I could learn and implement.
Yeah. And also I think we're all riddled with this. This is why it's so beautiful that we can sit and talk about these things in a collective like we did today and just even here now, because it's like, did you read this? No, I didn't read this. Did you read this?
Right.
The one woman in the course today said, oh, there's a chapter on breathing in this book, Meditation is Medicine. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get the book and find the chapter.
Right.
I don't know. I want to know what they want to say. Right. And it's not like everything we can find on YouTube is going to be like wildly accurate and great. So I think that's like the breathing coach's dilemma.
But what's also funny is I'm sure if you talk to like the 10 people that have been around each of the coaches in the course today, those 10 people that know them in real life outside the course would be like, you know more about breathing than anybody on earth, and all of us are like, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But the other question, I do still feel like there's this hesitance in the coaching world as far as like the strength and conditioning world of like how we bring this in, right? Like, what is this? Like, and what I feel like today, I feel like it's shifting a little bit. I will say that. And what I am kind of starting to see is that coaches know breathing is a thing. Like strength and conditioning coaches, some sports coaches, and obviously there's some sports that this is going to like click with sooner. Like you talk to a cross country coach or a swim coach, there's gonna be a little bit more of like immediate like recognition about breathing versus maybe a basketball team or something.
Right.
But in the strength and conditioning world, it does seem like breathing is becoming a thing. And what I see is, but no one knows like what to do with it. There's like, I know there's this world of breathing that probably makes a difference to my athletes, but I have no idea where to start, what to do. And so to me, that's kind of like an exciting space though, because I can kind of like, I can
program that.
I can answer those questions.
Yeah. And that's real. I think it's like when we worked, the flagship team I'm always talking about is working with Denison University, because I had the beauty of working with a coach one-on-one in her own private world and her own personal health.
Oh, wow.
And then having her saying, we're doing all this work. Could this apply to the swimmers? And then like, that's the door, right? That's like the baton gets passed to you where it's like, let's get the athletic director. Let's have some conversation around cold exposure even. Let's see what we can weave in and where are the differences being made. And I don't know how much we didn't talk about this very much today, but like the stats that are coming out of Denison because we got to see, because we had the coaching behind the scenes, right? We had the first season where we weren't there, where I still have stats because I know the coaches, right? So there's stats. And then there's 2 years of us coming in and running stats season over season and just saying like, we get 5 minutes. Like this is the other challenge in this world is there's so much practice time and there's so many drills and skills.
Right.
So you get 5 minutes of practice. How are you going to use that to your biggest advantage? And then utilizing that 5 minutes, we had students doing testing during the course of the week when they do their vert jump and their grip strength or whatever else they're doing. And then it's like, okay, great. Well, we saw improvement from 5 to 20% of people in understanding air hunger or CO2 tolerance, whatever we're going to call it. Yeah. We had 69% improvement, greater rate of improvement in races and times. Wow, that's right. Awesome. And then you get students to start to buy in more, and then you get there. Because the truth is, it's easy to improve CO2 tolerance over time if you were like starting from zero, right? If you're starting from not very good,
right?
So then you get students to be like 20 to 40% improvement, and all of a sudden we're at like 95% rate of improvement. And I just was talking about this briefly on another podcast. It's like I want people to hear these stats, even though they're anecdotal in some way. They're real stats from 80 people on a team. This is the entire W on the board. Like, this is not the hardest thing to implement into your coaching staff or your coaching team. I think you would agree with this. And people like you and I are out here being like, I'm going to ring the bell. I'm going to bang the drum. I'm going to I'm going to knock on your door until we see change.
Right.
And definitely with like the likes of like Dave Wood is over in like New Zealand, Australia, working with UFC fighters and MM. There's more and more breath. But then there's people like you and I that are just really, I feel like we have to ring the bell quite a bit to get people to be like, okay, you're going to come in and what's that going to look like? And there's no precedent for budgets for creating, these roles or these spaces or having us come in to program. And so, and we mentioned today that there's the first full-time breath only coach that's leading breath for University of North Carolina football.
I saw that.
And that's like,
you have no idea how many people sit that to me.
I know, 1 million people. And it's like, hello. And it's not about the full-time job per se, but it's like, it's coming. And if any coaches are listening to this, whether that's high school or university level or professional athletics, if you're working in that world, like if you don't know that it's coming, then you're in the caboose and you need to figure out that it's coming and get ahead of the curve, because as the teams get stronger, smarter, breathe better, they're going to be more easily finding ways to win.
Yes.
Right. And that's like, I think that's the big rub is how do we shake the trees, Zach?
Oh, I mean, we just keep pounding on doors. And I think your method of working with coaches is huge. And like, I've had some buy-in at the University of Tennessee, which has been super exciting. Right. And I do think one of the ways I've had some buy-in there is through the training aspect, right? Like we talked about that a little bit earlier, but it's like, if I go to a strength and conditioning coach and I say like, well, let's just do strength and conditioning for the muscles that you use to breathe. Are you training those muscles? You know, like, and you phrase it. I just try to phrase it in that language as much as I can. Make it palatable, right? You just got to speak the language.
We got reps, we got sets. You ready?
Yeah, we got reps and sets. We're going to do this thing. We're going to make things stronger.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a little bit easier. But yeah, you mentioned something else earlier. Oh, with the team you're working with, I'm curious, like, have you worked with other, like the strength and conditioning coach or other people on staff to kind of, because that's one thing I'm honestly thinking about is like, how do I build what I want to do? Because I know one of the strength and conditioning coaches, but what I want to kind of do is start to bring this into these other teams that I'm working with and like partner with the other people they're around, from like their physical therapists or their, their trainers that are actually doing cold therapy with them already, and kind of like, how do we begin to bring some of those tools in? Because what you mentioned earlier was like, they only have so much time, right? They have so many things to do. Like the collegiate athlete schedule is crazy.
Bonkers. Yeah.
It's bonkers. And like the amount of travel they do and everything that goes into being a collegiate athlete is crazy.
Maladaptive training, not recovering enough. Oh, you know what's really interesting that helps with that? Breath and cold.
And how about we throw in NIL deals where now you can get sponsored. You better be on social media to get sponsored. And anyways, so that's what I'm kind of thinking. Is like, they only have so much time. How can I make myself kind of like throughout all the things they're doing, like bringing in breathing to their strength conditioning sessions? How can I work with their coach to help them with some warm up, some cool down pieces, or with their trainer when they're doing cold, like,
Yeah, I came in with Sherpa to be like, hey, again, like getting the golden ticket of really walking in through the coaching staff and then having my first meeting where I came in with my PowerPoint presentation slides and talked about everything from women's cycling to how breath cadence and what we were going to do and work with. And I said, I need an hour and a half with the coaches, and whatever coaches were willing to come. There was 4 or 5 coaches that came, including the strength and conditioning coach.
All around the swimming team?
All around the swim team, but the strength and conditioning coach who worked with a couple other teams, of course, and then also the athletic director, an incredible woman named Nan. And that was like, you start to get buy-in and understanding from that coaching team, that staff, and then it starts to trickle down, right? So, but you got to do the weird things, right?
Yes.
So I had to like lay the coaches down on the carpeted room floor after I did PowerPoint slides. It's like, okay, look, I know it's not, I can't bang out a whole hour-long breathwork session. They wouldn't last. Not that they couldn't do it, just like they'd be like, what are we doing? Eye roll.
Right.
So it's like, great, we have 15, 18 minutes. Can you guys give me that 15, 18 minutes right now? We're going to do 3 different breathing protocols. The strength and conditioning guy, who's lovely, was like, just at first kind of like, I'm going to lay on the floor. Like, what am I, it's like, this is nothing that any of these people are doing. One of the guys was a little bit excited because he had read like James Nestor's book on breath. And was I've done some breathing and yoga, and he's kind of in it to win it. The
Gateway book.
Totally, the Gateway book. Yeah, it's a good one. We should be sending that book to all the coaches. And then we breathed, and then there was like, there was a little bit of a light bulb, I think, across the coaching staff enough, and the strength and conditioning guy to be like, hey, okay, I get it. The rub therein exists where not many of them want to coach it. They don't want, they're like, how am I going to, is it going to be like fluffy, foofy breath work? Or like, this is where also BreatherFit and having an RMT comes in, is having a device that feels like a bit masculine or a bit like functional tool. I'm doing something. And so, and then the other thing is like, just to like encourage coaches, and even if you are an athlete and you're listening to this, to go to your coaches and get people like Zach and I in the door, because what I did, we did 2 years of breath, and then we rolled in cold. They didn't have cold exposure there. I went to some companies, made some deals. They found some donors to get the money together to get 2 cold tubs, one for each locker room. And then we had the school psychologist come in on the day we rolled out cold exposure, and we did full team workshop of cold exposure for all 80 swimmers. And the school psychologist came in and talked about the structure and power of belief and changing your belief through a growth mindset, and how, we can have a notion, we think A is true, but then we see that B might be true, and then how we change the thoughts that we actually have, or the belief pattern that we have. And that was super helpful, right? Because then there's someone who comes in, the psychologist, who talks to the teams once or twice a month, because that's like a priority in collegiate athletics, making sure everybody's, on the up and up and feeling mentally, emotionally well. She sort of briefs the landscape, and then we get to come in and talk about why cold is important for mental, emotional well-being, how it simulates, coming off the blocks or that like hyper stressful moment of competition, and how you're navigating getting better at practicing for competition in those critical moments where you can catch a second or two.
Right.
And then just what it's going to do for them from like a metabolism, sports performance, recovery perspective, right? So like, you are only as fit as what you can recover from.
Right.
And so it isn't going to be every school that, maybe they're all listening to this now, and it will be, but it's not every school that's doing that. And it does take a modicum of like, okay, this is something new, and we're innovating and iterating. And by the way, breath is the thing. And it's really not something new. It's been around for thousands of years. We're just not using it as a tool. Meanwhile, I watch them spend thousands of dollars on like sound gear for under the water, like just stuff that I'm like, okay, cool. And maybe breath.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You're bringing up multiple stories for me, but one, I was at a CrossFit camp recently, and they asked kind of like, how do I get buy-in in the CrossFit setting? And the first story that came to my mind was that in my gym, I was like trying to encourage some people to begin working on adapting to nasal breathing, even during exercise. Cause I'm like, listen, who cares if you win the workout today?
Yeah.
Like, what are you adapting for today? Like, what are you working towards?
Yeah.
And what I realized really helped some of the people in my class begin to buy in was that the stud in the class was all in.
Yeah.
So the
person who's like putting up the best time.
The person who's putting up the best time, the person everyone looks at, the person who's got his shirt off and is jacked, he's all in on nasal breathing. And so then it starts to make some people be like, I guess he's doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like when you're talking about like a player or two or something. Like, it's amazing how we just get like a couple people do it and are on board. Like, if there are people, other people look to, if they're coaches or athletes, it creates this big effect.
Yeah. Or if they just start to get better times, win some races or whatever. It's
why is he
like,
catching
oh,
me?
I was making fun of that guy. What's he doing? He's making all that weird noise. He's blowing into that weird black pipe. What's that about? Look at that loser. And then all of a sudden he's a winner. And then it's like, oh, wait, what was that thing? Can I borrow it? You know?
Exactly.
And so I want to tie this all into what we want to talk about as well, which is like this really beautiful tool that you and I have been both using, and now you're working with the company, the BreatherFit, the Breather. We also have like Breather Voice, right? So there's a few different models, but the BreatherFit is the one that I use most often. Do not ask me to sing. I won't ask you to sing. I know. It's all right. I'll do the singing.
Okay.
But the BreatherFit is the model that I use typically with most clients, and I think it's also, depending on budgets and schools and who you're working with and what kind of teams, or if it's individual athletes, it's like the most reasonable to be able to weave into programs like this. So I want to talk about the world of RMT.
Let's do it.
Which so many people don't really know, but respiratory muscle training. Talk to us a bit more about the world of RMT and what you're starting to see and how you got this device in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, the biggest thing is I was working with breathing clients, athletes, and I realized I started to like get them to a point where like I could continue to push them in certain areas, but it was like across the board, different things I was trying to train them on. I realized, okay, I'm getting to a certain point, especially when we talk about respiratory muscle training, which I can just take a step back and dive into, but like, where do I go from here? And I realized the next phase was resistance. Like I needed to add resistance to their breathing to get the next level of training needed. And after looking at like a bunch of different projects, the BreatherFit was just by far the easiest to just use out of the box. It was just simple, pretty cheap. Everyone I was working with was up for like, okay, here, $50, sure. I'll grab one. And the results are crazy. And so it will back up. You want me to like go into RMT?
I want you to back up and to talk a bit about respiratory muscle training because it has existed for quite some time. And also anyone who's working, we're talking about athletes a lot today, but even people who have disordered breathing, either fitness induced or just generally dealing with asthma, there's so many ways that it can really help the body. So I want you to talk a bit about respiratory muscle training, maybe where it's come from, and the people who founded this company that you're working with as well.
So basically the company I work with, PN Medical, who makes the BreatherFit, the Breather Voice, they first made the Breather in 1980. And this was, if we ever seen people in the hospital, I brought this up earlier, like the little piece where you blow into it, it blows the ball up in the air. Like that's the original respiratory muscle trainer. But really, this all arose out of sickness because we realized people were having breathing issues, whether it's recovery from surgery or they're having issues with asthma, COPD, swallowing issues. And by training this, people saw results, right? And then the next step was to add resistance to this versus that's just the little ball piece is just one level of resistance that's very light. But like the next step was, let's add layers of resistance to train their inhale and their exhale together and just train it all. And we can ramp up the resistance as we need to. And as people develop, just like any type of training we do, right? We were able to move one load, so we add more load until we can move that load. And then, so it's the same thing here. And basically what RMT is respiratory muscle training. And it's training the muscles we use to breathe. So the first thing I always tell people, especially like we're talking about in the athletic world, is that your lungs aren't moving the air in and out.
There is a surprising number of people that's like lungs are musculature.
Yeah, but really the muscles are the diaphragm, the intercostals, the abdominals are responsible for moving the air. So earlier I made the analogy of a syringe, right? So your diaphragm is like the plunger on a syringe. As that syringe pulls down or your diaphragm contracts, it draws in the air. And then when the diaphragm goes back or that plunger goes back up on the syringe, the air comes back out. And so the diaphragm is the respiratory musculature primarily on the inhale and the abdominals, intercostals on the exhale. And so this device basically strength trains those muscles just like you would add more load on a barbell for a squat or something like that.
Yeah. And it's also really, it's like an interesting piece to think about the way, I don't know if you've ever seen a diaphragm. Like I was talking earlier today about how I've dissected a sheep in the most humane way possible from a butcher that does like, full polyphase farm type deal stuff and overseas. And so like beautiful, sacred ability to have an animal where you can actually see all the things that might correlate. The sheep happens to be, even though they're on four legs, a lot of similarities to the human structure.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I have not
And so when you when you look at a body cavity like that and you can see the diaphragm, it's just incredible how it's so thin. And there's parts of it that are almost, it feels like it could be transparent. It's so thin and it's so strong. Like it's the most, you look at the way that the tissue is like banded and how you like can kind of stretch and pull on it and really see it. And it's for something so thin, it is so wildly strong in the body and it's doing so much work. And it's not something that we can train as easily, right? And so it's like understanding that it feels like these kind of two interconnected parachutes in the body and then it's moving in tandem and harmony with the pelvic floor and so many things that we lose.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about the back pain that exists in the strength and conditioning world for people many times is like they're not really
And military.
In military, not engaging the pelvic floor, not understanding how diaphragmatic breath, which by the way, every breath is a diaphragmatic breath.
Right.
Some people are like, today we're going to diaphragmatically breathe, but it's like we always diaphragmatically breathe. So just understanding that this musculature is so important. And then while there are ways to, I think, train it loosely while you're training other things, this is like a really targeted way to change the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, something that comes to mind is like a question people always ask me when I start to say like, yeah, we should train these muscles. It's like, okay, I grab this thing, I start doing it. How long before I see results? And my answer is always like, well, my first answer is always immediately, because just like we saw today, when everyone's laying on the ground, as soon as they add the resistance to their breathing, you can, you know, like watching everybody, as soon as they did that first breath, we watched them all do it without the BreatherFit, then watched them all breathe with the BreatherFit. And immediately they like pelvis tucks, ribs pull down. You can see their whole body posture change to organize itself in a way to powerfully breathe. Right. And without that kind of load on the breath, a lot of times we just breathe in that kind of backwards posture.
Yeah.
So that's the number one thing. Cause I tell people like the first thing as an athlete you need to be able to do is be aware of your breathing. Because if you have no awareness of your breathing, you're probably holding your breath or just erratically breathing. And so the ability to immediately bring awareness to your breath and to the posture you're breathing in is huge for anybody. But then as far as strength training goes, it's just like a muscle, right? Like, so if we're going to strength train a muscle, if I go do 3 squats and then I'm like, okay,
why am I not huge?
Why am I not stronger? Why can't I run faster? You're like, well, you got to put in a little bit of work. So it's the same thing with this. Like you've got to train it consistently. I think you said what you did. Usually I told people 4 weeks, but you said you did 6 weeks of training.
We did 6 weeks with the Sherpa Breath and Cold. We have a program. I have a mentorship that's called Breath and Cold Mastery. That's a 9-month container. And so we did a 6-week training protocol. And that was predominantly for like the first 2 weeks, people getting used to the device. Cause we talked a bit today that like, if you use the device and you use it a little too lightly so I have one-on-one calls with them to check in to be like, how's it going? And then really honing in on the device and then going through at least 2 weeks of beginner protocols, right? Some people like put it off for a day or two, you know, all the things that happen. So at least 2 weeks of beginner protocols because you got to have those 14 to 21 days, I think, figuring out how to use the device to then put them into the last couple of weeks of advanced protocols, right? Where it's like about power, endurance, really racking up on the resistance, but you can't just jump there.
Correct.
You can't just like be like, hey, I'm going to put it on a 5. One of our guys today in the mentorship said, I went from 1 to 6. And then I was like, I had breathing muscle pain for 3 days after because it creeps up on you, you know? And it's like, it may feel like, well, this is simple. You're talking about 5 or 10 minutes a day, right? Yeah. So,
it's 2 sets of about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it definitely, like I rarely, to be honest, like I've used it quite a bit and like, I rarely am on a 5 and a 6. I'll just like, if I'm going to like do a training season of it, you know, it's like other things too. You go on squats, you go on squat cycles or you go on bench press cycles. Like you don't just, I mean, some people will say you should just max your squat every day, but like the majority of people don't think you should probably just max out your back squat every single day. And it's kind of the same thing for this. It's like go through a season of training and then you can go through a season of maintenance. And those are like on the app, those are actually our programs. Like we'll encourage people to do like strength and then do maintenance, then come back into it versus just hammering it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And the app is super simple, which is nice in the past because there's so many other apps out there that are trying to like, again, deliver a pizza with a semi truck. And it's like, I'd say 80% of the time I'm not even using the app because I have my own protocols written. So it's like, you don't have to, you can just like get after it. And
for sure. I mean, and that's, to be honest, like when I'm doing it, I'll do it as part of my warm up. And I kind of want, you know, the app is great, and I think it really helps people in the beginning. But we also, as breath coaches, right, we always want people to be aware of what's going on. And sometimes if we're just staring at a screen, we're just doing
Not
this
aware.
thing versus like feeling, how am I breathing? Am I breathing more powerfully? Or, you know, but there is a degree where some people need the timing of it or different things like that. So
Yeah. And then how do you correlate it when you're like working with an athlete in warm up or throughout the course of their training? And then are there places that you're correlating? Like, I think that's the first question I want to ask you. And then I want to talk a bit about the nasal versus mouth thing. But
yeah.
like how athletes are using it and then they're like, great, I'm feeling like I'm getting a bit stronger. I feel like I'm less winded. I'm feeling like I have more powerful capacity for breath, which is really like, it's actually, you know, there's this kind of debate too, like how much can you actually increase your lung capacity? Your lungs are the size that they are. But like if you're using the musculature, you can actually pump more air in and out of the system. But translating it from the usage occasion of sitting like as this gentleman is in the box or maybe laying down and using the BreatherFit, using the respiratory muscle trainer, and then translating that to when people are in the gym and pushing reps and sets, like understanding
reps and
about
sets of this or reps and sets of like
reps
their
and sets of
workout?
their workout or
Okay.
anything else.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
how are they translating that where you're like getting them to, because there's we do what we practice repeatedly, right?
Right.
And so if we're still holding our breath in other parts of the day or still not understanding how to connect the dots when it comes to having powerful breathing mechanics, are you working with them as a coach to say, here's where you're breathing on the inhale, the exhale, on the push or the pull?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're making me think about kind of like CrossFit athletes specifically, because I'm thinking about in the gym. And something I'm always working with them on is the awareness of their breathing to know when they're inhaling and exhaling. And it's nice in CrossFit because almost everything is somewhat cyclical. Like, you know, like a big thing I'll say is exhale when you exert, you know. And the key with the BreatherFit, the way that helps that is two ways kind of. So one is I really think not enough of us are focusing, like we'll do a lot of belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. We'll focus on breathing 360, you know, which is good, but that's all ignoring the exhale. And if we're really pushing ourselves to our limits, like there's a time where we need to dump CO2 and exhale.
Yeah.
And especially I think that helps people to like when you're in, if you have confidence in your exhale and you're dying and you feel like you're gasping for air, knowing like I just need to pump it out, and you understand both the mechanics of what musculature you're going to use for the exhale, but also that CO2 buildup is causing a lot of that feeling. You have those two pieces of knowledge and the ability after training the exhale to pump it out. Then as you go, you know, you have confidence that you can control your breathing, you can regulate yourself, you can sustain yourself through the rest of that training, whether it's, you know, running or on the rower or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The other piece I think about is the strength athlete. So one of the athletes we work with, he's super into the device, and I work with him. His name's Wes Kitts. He's just went to the Olympics for weightlifting, like the strongest person I've ever met in my life. And it's all about the brace for him, right? Yeah. And so we work a lot with his athletes and him on like getting the ribs down and understanding how to just stack the spine and fully inhale 360 degrees. And so we'll even do things where we load him like in a front rack, and then we use the BreatherFit. So it's like, can I fully take this nice deep inhale into my belly with 300 pounds on my shoulders or whatever we're training?
That's wild. You're like walkouts, BreatherFit. It sounds like wild, exciting training, and everybody needs to be all hands on deck to make sure nothing goes sideways.
Well, I say 300 pounds, but for him, that's like nothing.
Nothing.
But,
yeah.
The key piece is that because if I don't know if you like watched a lot of weightlifting, but in weightlifting, we're like once they catch a clean in the bottom of a squat, right, and they can be buried down there, and they stand up, and you've just had this huge like allostatic load. Like you've used a ton of energy to just stand up out of the bottom of the squat, and you have all that weight just on your shoulders burying your respiratory system. And you have to collect yourself before you do the rest of the movement, which is driving the bar overhead. And somehow you have to be able to breathe in this position after squatting the weight and still be, I mean, you'll see people start to like kind of go out.
Yeah.
Because they'll be so fatigued from standing up, they won't be able to breathe. And the jerk is just kind of like scary.
Right.
So literally training to understand, I don't need to breathe up into here. I can breathe low and wide.
Yeah.
The load's not really affecting that as much as if I'm so used to all day breathing
upper
into
chest
my
breathing.
upper chest breathing, then I just get buried.
Yeah. Cool. So that's such it's just good advice to really talk through all that too for people who are listening. And I want to divert our attention really briefly to people with COPD, people that are navigating asthma, or maybe it's like we talked about exercise-induced asthma a bit today in the course. It's like, what are the ways that we can mitigate some of these things happening? Are you seeing success stories because there's so much of this in the background history of devices like BreatherFit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of like, honestly, the bread and butter, like the fitness and the athletes is kind of like the sexy stuff I get to talk about and I work with. But behind all that is like the 99% of the customers that PM Medical is working with are people with like breathing issues that are seeing transformative results with it. So again, it's just something that we don't train throughout our lives, especially with the posture most of us have. Like we just get used to, not only are we not training it with resistance, but we're not really training it at all because we're chest breathing and shoulder breathing. And then, so we're not even getting in the normal unweighted reps.
Yeah.
And so with people who have dysfunctional breathing or respiratory illness, as soon as we start to add a little bit of training in, we see transformative results.
Yeah. And you were talking a bit about some of the research you guys have tons of research behind what is going on with this. And can you just like a little anecdotally, one or two stories of people who have brought forth testimonials that you've been inspired by that are interesting and maybe unexpected even, because there's like, we're talking about respiratory muscle, we're talking about load, we're talking about athletes, but like people who are using this device in a way that is actually helping them thrive through health challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two that come to my mind right off the bat are somebody who videoed a testimonial for us, and she talked about two things. One, a few different things that are just like really cool to me because, you know, if we have grandparents and people who are close to us, like we hate to see certain like trends in their health go down. And so hearing from people who are maybe elderly who mimic people who are really close to us and then hearing how it's transformed them is, I think, probably the most powerful.
Yeah.
But hearing from that group, things like, you know, losing their voice and then being able to get their voice back again and being able to project their voice again because they trained their respiratory muscles. Or, you know, one of the ones I always feel bad for are people who, like we see people start to hunch over and over, and we hear testimonials from people who started using the breather and unexpectedly began to get more upright. Like they're recognizing their posture just like we did today, but like on a more like a bigger level, being able to stand upright again. And then we've even heard from people who have like brain injuries, things like that, who may have lost control of like respiratory systems or respiratory musculature at a point, but bringing that back in, training it, reawakening is probably the wrong word, but bringing back some awareness to that system and how much it brings awareness to everything else. Like you talked about earlier, kind of the diaphragm is connected in so many ways to everything going on in the body. And so if we can get it to start to function and work properly, the chain of events is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about that there's so much works through the diaphragm, like the hole that goes through the diaphragm, that we have like lymph and we have circulation and we have all these things that are going and moving the body, so that if we're moving the diaphragm more, we're moving and helping detox things through the lymphatic system, we're helping circulation, we're helping the body you couple something like this with nasal breathing, right? We talk about nasal breathing so much in the landscape of breath, but you couple it with nasal breathing, which is going to oxygenate the system more, then you get your posture back, then you get your breathing musculature back. And there's I think such a strong correlation to me, right? It's like, it's not like anyone's going to be like, oh, I have a TBI, a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
Let me pick this up. But then actually there is sort of like a correlation to being able to really sort of clean up other things in the body and support the body holistically.
Right.
So let's talk about that, because I know that that's a question that comes up a lot, which is people around the world. And I'm all the time screaming from the rooftops about, in a kind way, hey, people, let's breathe through our nose. Let's like stand up straight. Even when you were like discussing like how the CrossFit athlete stands, I was like sitting here being like, do I breathe? Do I brace? Do I, like we're all functionally doing this as you talk us through it. But just talking about why this is a device that you use your mouth for, and then also, how it is, how you share with people, and when they're like, well, this isn't a nasal breathing thing, is this still okay for me to use? Yeah.
One thing I would say is the reason it's designed to use your mouth is nobody really wants to use something over and over they're blowing out their nose into. Like
True.
we could probably design some sort of thing where you're just in your nose and you're just breathing in and out your nose, but I think that'd be pretty gross, pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the other piece of it is you can just move, we all know this, you can move a lot more air in and out your mouth with a lot more power.
Yeah.
And that's really what we want is in that strength training in particular that we use with the BreatherFit is we want to be able to move air powerfully in and out of the body in order to train those muscles. And that's a lot easier to do through the mouth. Where it ties into nasal breathing is, this is more anecdotal to me. Like I'm just saying, we don't have necessarily like hard science behind this. I'd love to see some hard science behind this, but one of the hardest things we see people when we have them convert to nasal breathing is just being able to move enough air. And I mean, part of that is we want them to adapt to being used to less air. But at the same time, we see them start to breathe, weird into their face, into their neck, and their shoulders to try to make it happen somehow.
Yeah.
But if we actually just trained the respiratory system, the correct way to breathe with resistance, with the BreatherFit or one of the other breather devices in tandem with teaching them to nasal breathe the rest of the time, it's going to make that process a lot easier because now they can actually use their musculature the way they're supposed to. It's strong enough to move that air through a smaller space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I even for me, I remember doing sprint work where I have to kind of like, I'm going to nasal breathe no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end being like, I'm holding on for dear life. I'm like bent over on the street corner in LA and I'm like breathing through one nostril because I'm like, I'm not going to use my mouth, right? Like we torture ourselves for, I don't even know why.
Doing this, pulling
it inside apart, putting the tape with they have magnets now. You can put like up your nose and then pull your tissue apart or whatever. But so I think it's a really important point though. It's like how are we functionally training, right? It's not that nasal breathing is the only way to go and that when we're at the gym, we need to be nasal breathing all the time. It's just how, and I certainly talk about this with in the Sherpa Breath and Cold training with athletes. It's like, you're never going to go to the race where you're trying to come in first or do your PR and be like, I'm just going to nasal. You're going to go all out.
I had somebody DM me on Instagram and say, hey, I'm about to go to the CrossFit games. I see you've been talking about nasal breathing. Should I try to nasal breathe the whole time?
And it's like, no, powerfully suck in that air and powerfully blow out the CO2.
Not.
Yeah.
Like after the CrossFit games, after competition season's over, come back and talk to me. We can like maybe work on training this. But the week before the games, I say go out there and breathe all you.
Yeah, breathe all you need to.
This
shows up with a dancer. I work with a whole group of professional dancers and this choreography duo who's relatively famous in the world of choreography and creative direction. And I get the beautiful opportunity to work with 60 or 70 dancers at a time. And so we have to use breath. Yes, over time, we want to build the system, right, to be better, stronger, faster. And also tell those dancers when they have like a 1 minute break in between like, an 8-minute song that's like full out dancing and they're remembering choreo and they're having to move and breathe. And they have 1 minute where the stage lights go off. It's like, what I'm going to tell them to do? I'm going to tell them to dump CO2 so they can get through the rest of the number, right? And that's not necessarily going to train the system to be more cardiovascularly adept, but it's going to train them to get through to the context of the next goal, which is like finish the number, give great face to the audience. Don't be so winded and sweaty and spitting and stuff because your cardio can't keep up with it.
Right.
But where can we go and play the game well, right? Alternating between nasal breathing or mouth breathing or blowing off CO2 and that's the nuance that's so beautiful about the work that you're doing and why bringing an RMT like BreatherFit into the mix is so important. And also it's not the only thing. It's why someone with your background showing up and sharing is so important. And hopefully like I get to do these things too. Because if we just show up with like as a one trick pony, it only gets people so far.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's part of a whole thing. And it's, it's funny. I'm sure you've seen this too. Like I'll go into certain evaluations with an athlete and you can't help it as a coach to go in like, okay, there's going to be, even if I don't say it in my head, I'm like, these things are going to show up,
Yeah.
And we've got to be prepared. Like I had this just the other day, so it's on my mind. Like I did the whole testing. I'm like, that was not what I was expecting. Like, this is the issue. Like, this is what I have to focus on. This is where I need to apply. And all of a sudden I had to, I was subconsciously telling the story through my evaluation of what I was expecting. I was talking to the athlete and he was like proving me wrong. I'm like, I need to adjust and I got to pull in this thing and this and this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good to have all these tools in the toolboxes and the whatever.
In the toolbox, in the arsenal.
You gotta have all these tools because if you're a one trick pony and then the person's like, well, I'm already good at that, then what do? How are you gonna help them? Because everybody, should be able to move forward. And you need to be able to help move everybody forward.
Yeah. What's the number one thing that you see that's like the disordered dysfunctional breathing when it comes to the athletic population?
Anterior pelvic tilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that was me.
Is that bro energy or what? Is that
I think it's just athlete. Bro energy athlete. And I don't think people realize it even, until I started really focusing. Like one of the big things I'll talk about, like leading up to using the BreatherFit with somebody is just paying attention to your breathing throughout the day.
Yeah.
Because if we make proper breathing habitual throughout the day, it's a lot easier to then breathe that way when we're adding resistance and breathe that way in the gym. And so many athletes I work with are anterior pelvic tilted. And then as soon as I fix them, like I can breathe so much easier.
So for the layman listener, anterior pelvic tilt, let's just describe what it looks like when you can see someone in your local gym or walking down the street with an anterior pelvic tilt.
Yeah. It's like their butt is sticking out.
Yeah.
Or I always talk about the belt buckle. So it's like if you had a belt buckle on, it's facing the ground.
Yeah.
And so I'll cue people a lot of times to pull their belt buckle up.
Yeah.
And then it makes it a lot easier to breathe low, kind of aligns your respiratory system, allows you to breathe lower. And that just plays dividends in so many things. So that's like one of the easiest ways to cue that is honestly with the BreatherFit and having somebody just do the exhale. Because as soon as you exhale,
you have to do that.
You have to do that. And so you set the exhale and then you have them breathe in after setting their exhale.
Yeah.
And that kind of cues the right position. And it's kind of interesting how exhaling hard puts you in a position where now you can inhale fully.
Yeah.
And so helping an athlete understand that, and then whatever movement they're doing, like just that basic awareness, and then you just apply that into what position are they in? Like, are they swimming? Are they reaching overhead? Can they still breathe low?
Right.
Or are they lifting overhead? Are they pushing something and just
swinging a baseball bat, whatever it may be. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I see it a lot. Just like in a little bit in the yoga community, there's like a lot of different interesting structural things that go on in alignment. And we've done ourselves a disservice. I say we because I used to teach yoga for so long, but we've done ourselves a disservice in some way. Yes, we're talking more about core bracing and circumferential breathing and 360 degrees. And there's still a large community of people that's always like, well, navel to spine and like pull in, pull up, right? Yeah. There's just biomechanical miscuing. And look, it's been woven into our vernacular for whatever reason, but really understanding that there's like the capacity for moving weight comes from really breathing into that inhale fully and holding an alignment with the posture. And then also this like tuck your tailbone. Like we hear this a lot across a lot of different sports. Like, oh, tuck your tailbone. But it's not really the same, right? Tucking your tailbone, people can overcorrect that really easily and get sort of that weird shape where they're like, it's like not exactly, they're like over tucking, right?
Right, yeah.
And so you know as well as I do, like you can't, if you really tried hard to tuck your tailbone on a squat, the squat's not going to go well. Yeah. Right? There's a little bit of that energy. And then you're dealing with people's structure, right? Which is so different if you have a long torso or you have like any of those other pieces.
Yeah. And taking that even like, so, I mean, I say that like there's this way we want to help people understand, but then it's also like, can we breathe in any position?
Yeah.
We should always be able to access our breath. And like in a world like jiu-jitsu or something like that, or wrestling, it's like you might be pinned in some weird way with your leg over your head and your arm underneath you. Can you still breathe?
Yeah.
And just to keep going back to the BreatherFit, like that's something I also love to do with it is like just put someone in a weird position, like their arm through, laying on their shoulder or stretched all the way out, and have them not with high resistance, but even on low resistance. Like, can you still fully inhale? Can you still fully exhale in this weird position, and figure out how to, because like, there's this good way we want to breathe. We want to learn how to do it right. But also we always want to be able to access our breath. Like if there's anything we always want to be able to do, it's breathe.
Access the breath, in whatever form or position. And jiu-jitsu is a great example. I saw it a lot in the UFC, MMA world when I was working with a client there. And also interesting to walk into these spaces where there are so many incredibly gifted and talented, well-trained athletes that it's usually, I'm like, I'm going to walk in here and everyone's going to know how to breathe. And I walk in the room and it's like 9 out of 10 of them don't. And that to me is just like the amazing, again, it's this low-hanging fruit to kind of reincorporate where we started the whole podcast, which is these are the spaces and the places where we can make up a few seconds of time, which make the win. Or we talked today in class a little bit in the training, we talked a bit about, he who drops to mouth breathing first loses, is usually tapped out, right? So like where we see people going and navigating their nervous system to exhaustion and then being like, okay, the the guy who nasal breathes the longest wins. That's the
Yes.
part of the game in some ways,
yeah.
right? Of course, you can use your mouth and some of those things. I'm so thankful to sit with you and talk about this.
Yeah,
It's
this
like
was
such
awesome.
a robust, deep dive conversation. I like to just kind of probe guests at the end of the
Let's
podcast
go
to
for it.
say, I like that you're like probe away.
We've been spending some serious time
we
together
have.
with we've been in some intentional spaces today, so I'm open and ready.
Yeah. So I like to ask, the one question that I want to not challenge you with, but just you talked a lot about habit stacking and putting things together in your life. And outside of the world of breathing, you're not allowed to use BreatherFit or breathing as the answer. Was there like the number one practice or thing that you work into your day, maybe it's not daily, but often into the week, that is just like a salvation, a biohack,
I love it.
thing that's really shifting your state and capacity as a human being?
Yes, especially a recent add to my life. You mentioned earlier today, and I almost wanted to like bring it up. It didn't really fit the context, so I'm glad I get to talk about it. Was play. You mentioned, I can't remember when we were talking about, but you said something about
telling someone to play more and they'll be less anxious.
Someone to play more and they'd be less anxious. And man, that has changed my life recently. And I always try to play, like even when I'm training and doing like CrossFit type stuff, it's play for me. But recently I finally bought a bike again. And like my whole life I biked till I was probably like 25.
And like road bike vibes or mountain bike trail.
So usually on a road, like when I was a kid, just like being a kid and being able to go out and ride your bike, go around the neighborhood, like no one knows where you are. You're just out on your bike.
Your parents are like, Zach.
Yeah,
Zach.
exactly. Calling houses like, is Zach over there? And I'm just out. And then even when I went to college, and then when I lived in Atlanta for 6 years, like I rode my bike everywhere in college. And then when I was in grad school, all through Atlanta, I rode my bike everywhere. And then when we moved to the city we're in now, Knoxville, it's not a super bike friendly city. I just stopped biking. And so that was like the last 5 or 6 years I haven't biked. And then maybe 3 months ago, I bought a mountain bike and started mountain biking again. And I remember the first time I did it, I was riding with my son in the mountains and like, get me somewhat emotional, but I was like just laughing, riding my bike through the woods. Because I was like, oh my gosh, I did not realize how much I missed this.
Yeah.
And so I've been riding my bike in the woods like almost every morning. And it's been unbelievable for me. So just the ability to go and just to keep going, because I'm obsessed with this right now.
Yeah.
I go, after I drop my son off to school, I go jump in the woods and ride for like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And I see deer every morning.
Yeah.
And they just kind of hang out and watch me ride my bike. And I'm in the woods all by myself. And it's just, it's a great way to start the day.
Yeah, that's so amazing. It's like grounding, earthing. You get a bit of nature, green, what makes us psychologically feel so good. And then it's like sport, exercise, a little sweat.
Yeah.
And navigate. There's something about mountain biking that I really like. My friend in Vail has taken me a few times, like who's like a mountain biker.
Yeah,
where
I'm not a pro by any means.
I'm certainly definitely not, but has taken me on a couple trails in my life where I'm like, I'm holding on for dear life. Is this going to be okay?
It's that like flow. It's like rock climbing to a degree too, like that like super challenging flow. Like if I lose focus, even for like I start to think about what I have to do later that day, all of a sudden like I hit a root weird and I like, kind of go off. I'm like, oh man.
You're like,
come back.
Okay. Yeah. And it's like, it's just riding your edges, right? In a little bit of areas of discomfort. Any of the mountain biking I've done recently has been more chill, but definitely like riding in those mountains, I was like, whoa, you have to be so present. It's like a cold plunge, right? You got to be like right there.
Exactly.
I love that. And then the last thing is, if you could go back and tell, you have a 10-year-old son?
I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old son.
Beautiful. So if you go and you walk into your, let's say 9-year-olds, maybe 9 to 15-year-old, and as your kids are getting older, and if you could go back in time and speak to yourself or speak to your kids, or maybe speak to someone who's really thinking about how do I optimize my well-being? How do I feel better faster? Like what's going back to yourself or talking to your kids to say, here's the thing that if I could go back to me in the mirror, I would say like, here's one pill you need to swallow. And I don't mean legitimate pill, but here's the one piece of advice that I would give you that will change the trajectory of the rest of your life and well-being. What's the nugget?
Oh man.
I know. Just people have given wild answers all over the place, but like, what's the nugget? The one thing that you would just, you could turn the clock back to like your 15-year-old self and be like, yo, Zachy, I got something to tell you. You got to listen.
I don't know. I guess I'm thinking something along the lines of like, just enjoy what you enjoy. Like, it's okay if these are the things you like, do those things.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what anybody else like thinks you should be doing. Like, that's just the way you're made. Have fun with it.
Yeah. Which is beautiful. It's sort of like, yeah, dance like no one's watching.
Yeah.
I love that. So beautiful. Thanks for spending time
Yeah,
with me
thank
today.
you so much for having me.
We're going to drop all your contact information into the
All
show
right,
notes. We're going to
perfect.
tell people more and more about BreatherFit and PN Medical. And then the website's so great. It has so much research and
Yeah.
all the things that anyone could ever need on it. So
Yep.
thanks for being
Thank you so much for having us. This has
here.
been awesome.
Yeah, we did it. Okay,
All right.
beautiful.